My daughter sent me a text message accusing me of choosing strangers over her for 19 years. She said I brought men into our home every week and she never felt safe. She said I was the reason she had been in therapy for 2 years. She sent it at 6 in the morning without warning, and I read it at the kitchen table in silence. I did not defend myself. I did not call her crying. I walked to my closet, opened a box I had been keeping for 9 years, and pulled out a photograph. Then I sent it to her without a single word of explanation. She called me 47 minutes later, sobbing so hard she could barely speak, not because I had hurt her, because she had zoomed in on the 12 men standing in the back row and realized she had seen every single one of those faces before at my kitchen table over a period of 19 years, eating dinner in a house she thought they had no right to be in. And she had recognized, in those 12 faces, something she had been carrying her entire life without knowing what to call it. Before I tell you what she saw, I need you to understand what she accused me of, because the accusation was not entirely wrong. That is the part that makes this story complicated. That is the part that kept me from responding with words. You cannot argue your way out of a truth that is being held in the wrong shape. You can only replace it with a more accurate one. Her message was precise. She had composed it. I could tell from the sentence structure the controlled language of someone who has been in therapy for 2 years. Words that have been worked until they say exactly what is meant and nothing else. She wrote, "You brought strange men into our home every single week for years. I sat at that table and watched and stopped asking questions because asking never helped. I left after graduation because I could not stay in a house that never felt safe. You prioritized your social life and the men in it over your own daughter. I needed a mother and I got a revolving door. I read it once, I read it a second time. Then I went to the closet. My name is Margaret. I was 25 when I married Daniel. He was 27, from a family that was everything mine, was not large, loud, warm in the way that warmth is loud, full of people who assumed you were included until you demonstrated otherwise. 4 brothers. A mother named Ruth, who was small and precise and saw everything. A father who laughed from his whole chest. When I sat at their table for the first time, Ruth leaned toward me quietly and said, "You are exactly what I hoped for." She said it like she had been expecting me specifically. I have thought about those words every year since. I loved Daniel with a certainty I had not known I was capable of until I was inside it. We married. We built a life together in the city where I had established my career. We talked about children with the comfortable confidence of people who believe the future is mostly cooperative. Those first 2 years were, as far as I could tell at the time, genuinely good. Not perfect. No marriage is perfect at close range, but good. We made plans. We had Nora. We sat at dinner tables and made the kind of ordinary, unremarkable conversation that becomes, in retrospect, the substance of a life. And then, in the 3rd year, something changed. Not all at once. This is the thing about the end of something, it almost never announces itself. Daniel became absent in ways that were hard to name. He was present in the house, but not in the room. He answered questions, but did not offer. He was kind in a technical sense, never cruel, never raised his voice, never did anything I could point to and say, "There, that is the proof." He was simply somewhere else. Even when he was standing directly in front of me, I tried for 18 months before I stopped trying in the active sense and started simply watching. I asked what was wrong. I suggested we see someone together. I rearranged myself in the small daily ways that women learn to do when they sense a distance opening and instinctively believe the answer must live in changing something about themselves. I tried all of that, and none of it made contact. He received every attempt with the particular politeness of someone who has already made a decision but has not found the words for it yet. I did not know there was something else. I want to be clear about that, because it matters for what comes later. I did not know until 2 years after the divorce was final, when Thomas, Daniel's second oldest brother, the one who made a joke before saying something real, called me on a Sunday afternoon and said, "I need to tell you something I should have told you before." He said he had been sitting with it for a long time and had decided the sitting was becoming its own kind of wrong. He told me Daniel had been seeing someone else for the last 14 months of our marriage. I sat very still on the phone and I did not say anything for a long time. Thomas said, "I found out at the end, not the beginning. By the time I knew there was nothing to stop, that I had not already failed to stop." He said, "I am sorry I did not tell you sooner." He said, "I think I believed it would have hurt you more to know." And then he said something I have thought about many times. "I do not think that was the right reason." I told him it was all right. Not because it was entirely all right, but because it was the truth that came out of me in that moment, which is sometimes the most accurate version, even when it is also incomplete. I never told Nora any of that. Not the affair, not Thomas's phone call, not the particular texture of what it felt like to understand, 2 years after the fact, that the absence I had been rearranging myself to close had not been closable, because it had not been about me. I kept that the way I kept other things inside the perimeter, unavailable for the story she was assembling from across the kitchen table. He left on a Thursday morning when Nora was 3 years old. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and said the words that are impossible to prepare for, no matter how long you have seen them coming. He said he was not happy. He said he was sorry. He said he thought we had made a mistake. He was gone within a month. He called occasionally in the first year, and then less, and then not at all. I made the decision at some point during that first year not to chase him, not to perform for Nora the fiction of a present father who needed only to be invited back. She would ask about him sometimes, in the way small children ask about the edges of things they do not understand, and I would answer at the level she was capable of receiving. He lives far away. He and I could not live together anymore. He loves you even when he is not here. I believe the last part. I believe it still. But love that does not show up in the world is not love that a child can hold in their hands. I need you to understand who was left. Not just me and Nora. Not just a single mother and a 3-year-old in a house that had been built for 2 people operating in loose coordination. Daniel's family was left too, 4 brothers and a mother, who had said, "You are exactly what I hoped for," and had meant it in a way that did not have an expiration date. Ruth called me 3 weeks after Daniel moved out. I had not expected to hear from her. I had assumed his family would follow him. Loyalty would sort itself the obvious way. I thought his family to his side, mine to mine. But Ruth called, and what she said was this: "You are still family. Nora is still family. Whatever Daniel has done, that does not change." She said it quietly, with the same precision she had always used, and I believed her, not because I needed to, but because Ruth was not a woman who said things she did not mean. His brothers called within the week, all 4 of them, separately, each one in his own voice, each one saying a version of the same thing. Richard, the oldest, was direct. "We are not going anywhere." Thomas made a joke to break the tension and then said something real underneath it. Martin, who traveled for work and had always been the quietest of the 4, said, "I know you are handling a lot. If you need anything, call." Paul, the youngest, just said, "We love Nora. We are going to be here." They were. Over the next 19 years, while Nora grew from a 3-year-old who could not understand what had happened to a 22-year-old who believed she understood everything, Daniel's family showed up for us consistently enough that their presence had its own texture, its own weight, not constantly, not without gaps, but with the kind of continuity that means something when it has been chosen rather than obligated. Ruth drove 6 hours to sit with me in the hospital when I had surgery during Nora's 2nd year of grade school and had no one else to call. She did not announce it. She called the night before and said, "I will be there in the morning and I will stay as long as you need." She stayed 4 days. Richard and his wife had us for Thanksgiving 4 years in a row until Nora decided she did not want to travel for holidays. Thomas and his oldest son came to a Sunday dinner when Nora was 12. Martin came 3 times across 4 years, always on work routes, always staying for dinner, always sitting across from Nora and smiling without pressing her into conversation because he understood something about private children from personal experience. She sat at that table every time. She watched them. She did not know a single name. Now I need to tell you about the decision I made. The one I have been sitting with since that Tuesday morning when her message arrived and I read it twice and went to the closet without answering. Because this is the part where I cannot explain away what happened. This is the part where the protection I thought I was offering becomes visible for what it actually was. Early in the years of the dinners, I made a choice about how to introduce Daniel's family. Not a dramatic choice, not a choice. I sat down and thought through carefully. A quiet, incremental choice made the way most of the choices that matter most get made without full awareness of the weight they carry. I decided not to introduce them explicitly as her father's family. Daniel had left. He had removed himself. I did not want Nora to build attachment to his family, only to be abandoned by that family too if they eventually drifted the way extended families drift when the connecting person is no longer present. I thought I was protecting her from a loss that had not happened yet. What I had actually done was remove the names from the faces. I kept the relationship, but stripped it of its context. I allowed the warmth, but withheld the explanation. I made a family of people who had shown up for us consistently for years, into a series of unnamed faces that a child was watching from across a dinner table, assembling her own meaning from available evidence with no information to correct the picture. A child who sees faces without names fills the silence with the story that makes the most sense from where she is standing. And Nora had been watching and thinking and drawing careful lines between observed facts for 19 years. The story she had assembled was coherent. It was built from real observations. It was the conclusion of someone paying close attention. It was also missing the one piece of information that would have changed everything. I need to tell you how the dinners began, because they did not begin as a plan. They began as a correction. When Nora was about 8 years old, Ruth came to stay with us for a week in the spring, one of her occasional visits, practical and warm simultaneously. The kind where she would cook and tell stories and sit with Nora in the evenings reading aloud from whatever Nora was currently working through. During that particular visit, Ruth made an observation. She said, "You are isolated, Margaret." She said it without judgment, the way she said most things. She said, "You work and you take care of Nora, and you come home and you do not let anyone into this house." She said, "A child needs to see her mother living in a community. She needs to see adults at the table. She needs to know that the world is full of people who can be trusted and who come and go without being dangerous." I had not thought about it that way. I had been so focused on stability, on the structure of our daily life, on making sure Nora had routine and consistency and a home that felt like a home, that I had not considered what she was learning by watching me move through the world in almost complete social isolation. Ruth said it without accusation. She said it the way you say something true that needs to be said, and then she went back to cooking and did not bring it up again. I thought about it for weeks. Then I started the dinners. Friends from work, neighbors I had been friendly with for years without ever really knowing, other single parents from Nora's school community, old friends I had let drift who were willing to come back. And when they were traveling through or had reason to be in the city, Daniel's family, Richard once, the year Nora turned 9, Thomas twice, with his oldest son the second time, Martin more often because he traveled for work, and my city sat on his regular route. 3 visits across 4 years, dinner each time, always easy, always ending late. Nora sat with us. At first, she was young enough to be naturally present in adult spaces, asking questions when something interested her, eating and listening and being a child in the peripheral way that children are peripheral to adult conversation and not bothered by it. Then she grew older and became quieter and stayed at the table as a matter of household routine rather than genuine interest. And then she stopped asking questions entirely. I noticed it. I want to be clear that I noticed. I attributed it to adolescence she was closing, becoming more private, becoming the person she was going to be. And part of that person was someone who kept her own counsel and did not spill questions into rooms where adults were talking. I thought the silence was the normal silence of a teenager who would rather be elsewhere and is tolerating the dinner as an obligation. I did not understand until that Tuesday morning with her message on my screen that the silence was not indifference. It was confusion, and confusion that goes unanswered long enough becomes a conclusion. She had been watching men come to the table, men of different ages and types, some of whom looked in ways she did not have the vocabulary for, somehow familiar to her in a quality she could not name. Men who were clearly comfortable in my kitchen, clearly welcome, clearly known to me in ways that suggested history rather than novelty. Men who sat across from her and sometimes caught her eye and smiled in a way that felt, she would tell me later, like they knew something about her that she did not know they knew, because they did. Every one of Daniel's family members who sat at my table knew her name, knew her from Ruth's monthly descriptions, knew they were looking at their niece or cousin or the daughter of the man who had walked away from a family that did not walk away from him. I understood all of that in the 40 minutes after I read her message. I sat very still, and I understood it completely. Not for the first time I had understood pieces of it before. In the way you understand things you are not yet ready to act on. But in that moment, sitting at the kitchen table with her words on the screen in front of me, I understood it in the particular way that removes all remaining excuses. I did not send a letter. I did not write a defense. I did not reach for the carefully composed response I had been building in my head for 4 years, the one I was always revising because I could never find the right opening. I walked to the closet. I opened the box. Inside the box, under years of accumulated photographs and documents, and the small physical record of a life, was the photograph from Paul's wedding in August of 2016. Paul was Daniel's youngest brother. He had gotten married in a backyard in a state 2,000 miles from where Nora and I lived. Nora was 17 that summer. She had decided she did not want to attend a summer program, a conflict she was not willing to rearrange. I had not pushed. I flew alone and stood in the backyard with Ruth and the 4 brothers and their wives and the constellation of children and cousins, watched Paul marry a woman who laughed easily and meant it, and had my photograph taken in the back row with 12 men I had known for over 20 years. 12 men who shared something with Nora, something in the brow and the jaw, a family signature that runs through Daniel's family like a thread. Something in the architecture of the face that I had recognized in Nora the day she was 3 days old. And I looked at her for the first time and understood that Daniel might leave, but these particular bones would remain. She had been carrying her father's family in the structure of her face her entire life without knowing what it was. I looked at the photograph for a long time. I looked at each face, Richard in the second position from the left, the particular way he held his shoulders, Thomas next to him, the jaw that was the same as Nora's jaw at the same angle, Martin at the end of the row, the brow line she had inherited with slightly less severity, Paul in the center, smiling the same way Nora smiled when something genuinely surprised her, and then the cousins, the next generation, children and young adults, each one carrying some version of the same thing. I had been waiting for the right words, There were no right words. Words could be argued with. Words could be heard through the filter of a story someone has been living inside for years. And when you hear something through that filter, it rearranges itself to fit what you already believe. You cannot talk someone out of a conclusion they have built carefully from real evidence over a long time. You can only show them something that their own eyes have to process before the argument can begin. A face is not a word. A face lands in the body before the mind can prepare a response. I took a picture of the photograph on my phone. I opened the message thread with Nora Sparse. The thread of a relationship reduced to its minimum over 4 years of silence, every entry visible on a single screen. I sent the image. No caption. No explanation. 12 men in the back row of an August wedding she did not know had happened. In a family she did not know she still had. Then I sat at the kitchen table and waited. I want to tell you what I thought about during those 47 minutes. My mind did not go still. It went, instead, very active, the particular kind of active that comes when you have done something that cannot be undone, and you are living in the narrow space before you know how it lands. I thought about Ruth, who was 81 now, and still called me on the first Sunday of every month, and still asked about Nora by name, with the patient consistency of someone who has decided to love a person indefinitely, regardless of whether that love is returned. I thought about Martin, who had retired to a house by a lake, and sent me photographs of the water occasionally, always without comment, as though the water was the message. I thought about Paul's twin daughters, 3 years old now, who had no idea there was a cousin somewhere who did not know their father's name. I thought about every Sunday dinner, every face across that table for 19 years. Every year, the names had stayed out of the room. I thought about the 11-year-old Nora who had attended a family reunion on Thomas's side one summer because she had asked to go, and I thought it was important that she experience his family's gatherings. Those warm, noisy storms of people who included you from the first moment. She had sat at a picnic table, surrounded by cousins and eaten potato salad, and laughed at things I could not hear from across the yard. She had not known they were her cousins. She had thought they were my friend's children. She had gone home that evening and said it was fun and gone to bed, and that was the last time I saw her, that comfortable in a room full of Daniel's family, because she was starting to close at that age, starting to become private, and I had not opened the door before it shut. I thought about that too, while I waited for the phone to ring. It rang at 7:43, 47 minutes after I sent the photograph. I looked at the screen. Nora. I answered, and she was already crying, not the managed crying of someone who processes emotion in organized ways, but the deep, unmanaged crying of someone who has been surprised by something that has rearranged everything they thought they understood, the kind of crying that bypasses decision. She said, I zoomed in, her voice broke on the last word. She said, the man on the left, he has my, and then she could not finish it. I said, yes, baby. They all do. She was quiet for a moment. The crying continued, but differently. There is a difference between the cry that is pain going in and the cry that is pain going out, and I had been listening to Nora long enough to know which one I was hearing. She said, who are they? Her voice was different on those 3 words. Not the voice she had used in the text message, not the controlled, composed voice of 2 years of therapy processing a wound. The voice of someone who has just opened a door and found the room behind it is larger than they thought. I told her. All of it, finally, with no more decisions about what she was ready to receive, no more calculations about what to protect her from, no more waiting for a right moment that had never arrived on its own. I told her about Ruth, about the phone call 3 weeks after Daniel left, about the 4 brothers who had each called separately within the week, about Richard saying we are not going anywhere, and Thomas making a joke and then saying something real underneath it, And Paul saying, "We love Nora, we are going to be here." I told her about the hospital. Ruth driving 6 hours, staying 4 days, sitting in a waiting room, reading a paperback, and not asking for anything. I told her about the Thanksgiving visits with Richard and his wife, 4 years in a row, and the family reunion with Thomas's children when she was 11, the one where she had sat at the picnic table with cousins she did not know were her cousins. I told her about Martin, who had come 3 times to dinner across 4 years of work trips, who had sat across from her and smiled without pressing her into conversation. I told her about Paul's wedding in August of 2016, the backyard 2,000 miles away, the photograph I had kept in a box for 9 years, because I could not find the right moment, and so no moment had ever arrived. I told her what "they all do" means. I said, they all have your eyes. They all have the particular way your father's family carries their faces, something in the brow and the jaw that I recognized in your face when you were 3 days old. All 12 men in the back row of that photograph. All of them. Your family. The family that has been showing up in our kitchen for 19 years because a woman named Ruth said you are still family and did not change her mind about it for 2 decades. She did not speak for a long time after that. The phone was quiet, except for her breathing. When she finally spoke, she did not say anything about the dinners. She did not say anything about the text message or the accusation or the 4 years of silence. She asked one question. She said, "Does Ruth know about me?" Not whether Ruth knew she existed. She understood that Daniel's family knew she existed. She asked whether Ruth knew about her. The specific her, the person she had become. I said, "She asks about you on the first Sunday of every month by name, with the same question every time. How is Nora? Not, how is your daughter? How is Nora? Your name, specifically, every first Sunday, for 19 years. Another silence. Longer this time. Then she asked something I had not expected. She said, "Do they know I stopped talking to you?" I said, "Yes." She said, "What did you tell them?" I said, "I told them we were going through something. I did not give them the details. I did not tell them what was in your text message or what you had been carrying. But Ruth and I want you to hear this." Ruth's question on the first Sunday of every month did not change when we stopped talking. She still asked, "How is Nora?" I told her I did not know the answer to that in the way I used to. And she said, "I see." And then she said, "I will keep asking." And she did. Nora was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said, "I thought I was erasing myself. When I went silent, I thought I was making myself not exist in that part of your life." I said, "You were the center of every conversation I had with that family for 19 years. She could not speak for a moment. When she could, she said, "I wasted so much time being invisible to people who were looking for me." She did not say it with self-pity. She said it with the particular frustration of someone who has understood something too late and knows the time cannot be returned, but insists on being honest about the cost of it anyway. I told her it was not wasted. I told her that nothing that leads you to the right place is wasted, even when the path was longer than it needed to be. I told her that Ruth was 81 and still called on the first Sunday of every month and was not going anywhere. She said, "And Martin." She said it with a specific quality. She had been thinking about Martin since I mentioned him. I said, "Martin retired to a house by a lake. He sends me photographs of the water with no captions. He has been doing it for 3 years. I told him once that you liked water." She said, "He has been sending photographs for me." I said, "Yes." She said nothing for a long time. Then, without knowing if I would ever see them, I said, "That is exactly right." She was quiet for a moment with that. The kind of quiet that is not empty. The kind that is full of something being understood at a level below language. the kind that takes a minute to settle before it can be spoken again. Then she said, "I want to meet them." I said, "They have been waiting a long time to meet you, too." I told her one more thing before we hung up. I had not planned to tell her. It came out because we had arrived at a place in the conversation where there was no more useful reason to hold it. I told her about Thomas's phone call, the one that came 2 years after the divorce was final, the Sunday afternoon when he had said, "I need to tell you something I should have told you before." I told her what he had said about Daniel, about the last 14 months of the marriage, about finding out at the end rather than the beginning, about sitting with it for 2 years before deciding the sitting was becoming its own kind of wrong. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He told you he was sorry." I said, "Yes." She said, "And then he kept coming to dinner anyway." I said, "Yes." She said nothing for a moment. I could hear her breathing, the particular quality of it when she is thinking something through a cadence I have known since she was a baby in the next room, and I was listening through the wall to make sure she was still breathing. It has changed in 22 years in the way that everything changes while remaining essentially itself. She said, "I am going to call him." I said, "Good." She called him 3 days later. She told me about it afterward. She said he answered on the second ring. She said she introduced herself, "This is Nora," and he was quiet for a moment, and then said, "I know who you are. I have been hoping you would call." She said it was simple. She said it was not the big dramatic conversation she had been afraid it might be. She said he asked her what she was studying, and whether she liked her apartment, and whether she had ever been to the state where he lived. She said they talked for 45 minutes about completely ordinary things, and at the end of it, she had made plans to visit in the spring. She said she cried for a long time after she hung up. Not the unmanaged crying of the first phone call when she zoomed in on the photograph. The different kind. The kind that is pain going out. It is the right question. It is the only real question. And I have sat with it, with the honesty it deserves, because it is the question that has no comfortable answer. The simplest answer. I was afraid of a loss that had not happened yet. I was so focused on protecting her from the possibility of loving another family member who might eventually leave that I denied her the chance to love the family that had already decided not to. Protection that removes information is not protection. I understand that now, in a way I could not seem to understand it clearly enough to act on while it was happening. It looks, from inside good intentions, exactly like shelter. But shelter that blocks information is not shelter. It is a kind of well-intentioned darkness. The harder answer? I was afraid for myself too. If I had introduced them explicitly as her father's family, there would have been a larger conversation about Daniel, about what had happened, about the years of his absence, about the ways I had restructured our life to function without him, and had, in the restructuring, closed things off that should have stayed open. I had been living, for 19 years, as a closed system, tight and functional and quietly suffocating in the way any closed system eventually becomes. Keeping the men nameless kept the larger conversation from being necessary. I am not going to claim it was fully unconscious. That would not be honest. There was a level at which I knew, not clearly enough, to change it. But clearly enough that I have not been entirely surprised, in the years since Nora graduated and left, and the silence settled in, to understand what the silence was about. The cost of that knowing without acting was 4 years of complete silence. 4 years of a daughter who had assembled her story carefully and was carrying it into therapy every week and could not bring herself to say it to me directly until a therapist told her the carrying was costing her something she could not afford to keep spending. 4 years of a relationship reduced to its minimum because both of us were waiting her for an apology she did not know yet was the wrong kind. Me for an opening that could not arrive until she said the thing out loud. She had to make the first move, even the wrong version of it. I am grateful for the text message that accused me of things that were both true and not true simultaneously. I am grateful for the therapist who made it possible. I am grateful for the courage it took Nora to send it at 6 in the morning before she could change her mind, built from real observations and real pain, and a conclusion assembled in the dark. Because that message, in all its imperfect accuracy, opened the door that 9 years of careful waiting had not opened on its own. We talked for 3 hours that first morning. We talked the way we had not talked in years, perhaps since she was small enough that talking was still simple, before the silence had accumulated, before she had built the story she lived inside, before I had made the decisions that left her inside it without the information she needed. She asked me everything. What Ruth was like in person, whether she had ever visited in the years after graduation, whether the family knew she had stopped talking to me. I told her yes, Ruth had asked about her, on the first Sunday of every month, even during the years of silence, always by name, always with the same patient interest. I told her Martin had sent photographs of his lake, and I had told him once that Nora liked water, and since then, the photographs had kept coming. I understood now that he had been sending them for her, through me, because it was the only channel available to him. I told her Richard had asked me, the last time I saw him, whether Nora was the kind of person who liked letters. He was not good on the phone, he said. He was good on paper. I told her I had not passed that along. She was quiet when I said that, not the quiet of someone processing something difficult, the quiet of someone who is updating something important. Then she said, I want to meet them. I said, they have been waiting a long time to meet you, too. She came home the following weekend, not to pick something up, not for a utilitarian visit of the kind she had managed occasionally in the first year after graduation, before the silence fully settled. She came to see me. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table, the one she had sat at as a child, and watched and stopped asking questions. And I made dinner, and we talked for 6 hours. And somewhere in the middle of it, she said something I have thought about every day since. She said, I think I was so sure I was invisible to you that I made myself invisible to you, and then I blamed you for not being able to see me. She said it with the clarity of someone who has been in therapy long enough to understand their own patterns, and still finds it surprising to say them out loud. She said it without self-pity, which is harder than it sounds. She said it the way you say something true, that cost you something to say, quickly and without decoration, before the impulse to soften it can arrive. I told her she was never invisible to me, not for a single day. I told her I could trace her through every room of every version of my life. The way you can trace water through rock, it changes the shape of everything it touches, even when you cannot see it moving. She nodded. She did not say anything for a while. The kitchen was quiet in the particular way kitchens are quiet late in the evening, when dinner has been cleared and the conversation has arrived somewhere real. Then she said, I think I need to zoom in on things more before I decide what I am looking at. I told her I needed to do the same, that I had looked at what I thought was shelter and had not looked closely enough to see what it actually was. We sat with that together, without rushing it, without trying to resolve it into something tidier than it was. This is the thing about a conversation that has been waiting 9 years. It does not need to be finished the same evening. It finally begins. It needs to be allowed to take the shape it takes rather than the shape you planned for it. We let it take its shape. I called Ruth the next morning and told her that Nora wanted to meet her. Ruth was quiet for a moment on the phone. Then she said, in the same precise voice she had always used, the same voice that had said, You are exactly what I hoped for at a kitchen table 30 years ago. It is about time. She said it without accusation. She said it the way you say something that has been true for a very long time and has simply been waiting for the world to catch up to it. I called Ruth the next morning and told her that Nora wanted to meet her. Ruth was quiet for a moment on the phone. Then she said, in the same precise voice she had always used, the same voice that had said, "You are exactly what I hoped for at a kitchen table 30 years ago. It is about time." She said it without accusation. She said it the way you say something that has been true for a very long time and has simply been waiting for the world to catch up to it. 2 weeks later, Nora drove 6 hours to meet Ruth in the town where Ruth had been living since she retired. She did not ask me to come. She needed to do that first meeting alone, she said. And I understood that in the way I understood most things about Nora, not because she explained it fully, but because I had been watching her long enough to know when something needed to be done on her own terms or not at all. She called me that evening from a gas station somewhere in the middle. She said, "She is exactly like you described." I said, "What is she doing?" She said, "Feeding me. There is so much food. She started cooking before I even got out of the car." I said, "That sounds right." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She has my hands. Margaret, she has exactly my hands." She said it with the same quality she would use the next morning when she called again, the quiet, complicated wonder of someone who keeps finding themselves in unexpected mirrors. She stayed 3 days. Ruth taught her the recipe for the bread she had made every Sunday for 50 years. They drove to a lake on the second day and sat on a dock and talked for 4 hours. And Nora said afterward that she was not sure she had talked to anyone that continuously and completely in her entire adult life. She said it like a fact, without drama, which made it heavier. Martin sent a photograph of the lake 3 days after Nora got home from Ruth's. This time, there was a caption. It said, "There is a spare room here, whenever she wants to see it." I showed Nora the photograph and the caption. She looked at it for a long time. She looked at the quality of the light on the water and the line of trees at the far edge of the frame. Martin always photographed the lake in the early morning, before the light flattened. He was particular about the light in a way he never bothered to explain. Then she said, "He has my eyebrows." She said it softly, with a smile that was complicated and new. Not the smile of someone who has found something they lost. The smile of someone who has discovered that something they did not know they were missing had been there the whole time, patient and quiet, in the back row of a photograph, in the caption of a lake photograph, in a phone call made on the first Sunday of every month for 19 years. That smile was worth every year of the box in the closet, every year of keeping the photograph and not knowing when it would be needed. Every year of waiting for the ground to be ready for the truth to land in it properly, rather than forcing it before the soil was prepared. There is something I have been thinking about since that first phone call, about the photograph and the box, and the 9 years the photograph spent inside it. I put it in the box the day I came home from Paul's wedding. I had not brought Nora with me. She had made her own choice that summer. A summer program and a conflict, and a 17-year-old who was increasingly private and I had not pushed. I had stood in that backyard with all of them and had my picture taken in the back row and thought about what it meant that she was not there. And then I had come home and put the photograph in a box and gone to my closet and set it on the shelf and closed the door. I had kept it. That is the thing I keep coming back to. I had kept it for 9 years without understanding entirely why I was keeping it. The way you keep certain things without naming the reason, trusting some part of yourself that understands something the rest of you has not caught up to yet. The box in my closet had photographs and documents and a few birthday cards from Ruth and a letter Martin had written me in the first year after Daniel left, before he understood that letters were not the right format for what he wanted to say, and had switched to the photographs instead. All of it kept, none of it shown to her. The particular hoarding behavior of someone who believes that the truth will be necessary eventually and is not yet sure how. She had to zoom in first. That is the part I keep returning to. I could not walk up to her front door with the photograph in my hand. I could not send it unprompted into 4 years of silence and expect it to land the way it needed to land. She had to open the door from her side. She had to send the message that was partly right and partly built from 19 years of watching in the dark. She had to say the thing directly, even the wrong version of it, because the wrong version was the only door we had, and it needed to be opened. She opened it, and what was on the other side was not what either of us expected. I want to tell you one thing before I finish. Not about Ruth or the photograph, or the 12 men in the back row. About the text message itself, the one built partly from real pain and partly from years of silence, assembling itself into the only story available in the dark. She sent it because her therapist told her she needed to say the thing directly. She had been working up to it for 2 years. From inside the story she was living in, it felt like an accusation. It was an accusation. It contained real pain and real observations, and the careful conclusion of a person who had been watching from across a kitchen table for 19 years, without the one piece of information that would have changed what she was looking at. And it was also the thing that made it possible for me to finally open the box. I had been keeping that photograph for 9 years. The right moment had never come on its own. The box had stayed in the closet, and the 12 men in the back row had stayed unnamed, and Nora had stayed in the story she had built in the absence of their names. She had to open the door first, even from the wrong side, even with the wrong version of the story in her hands. Say the thing, even the imperfect version, even from the wrong side of the door, because the only way to find out what is on the other side is to open it, and you cannot open it from a distance. You have to walk up to it. You have to send the message, or make the call, or reach into the closet and take out the box that has been sitting there quietly for years, holding the truth that was waiting for the right moment. Send the message. Make the call. Open the box. The photograph is there. It has always been there, waiting for the moment you are finally ready to zoom in. And what you find when you zoom in, what you find in 12 faces in the back row of an August wedding, in a lake photograph sent without comment for 9 years, in a phone call made on the first Sunday of every month, is not what you expected. It is not a revolving door. It is not strangers. It is not a mother who chose a social life over a daughter. It is a family that refused to leave. A grandmother who kept the same question going for 19 years. A quiet man who found the only channel available to him and used it consistently. 12 faces sharing a jaw and a brow and a way of carrying themselves through a room that a 22-year-old woman recognized the moment she zoomed in close enough to see it. Herself, in 12 different faces. In a family that had been showing up at her kitchen table her entire life, waiting for the day the door would finally be open, wide enough for her to see them clearly. You just have to zoom in.